In other news, how's the weather? This is the test I'm doing.
Okay. Well, the weather down here is fantastic. I mean, just really, we've had about 3 days of just, really unbelievable weather.
Yeah.
And, it's gotten finally, somewhat summer-like, and such it's so different from New York. Gail actually slipped on something and fell, and had to go to the hospital um, for some stitches. It's just really treacherous. I mean, all the ice.
Right.
And I managed in my thing. I mean, New York is a wonderful place, but it has its thorns, as you know.
Yeah, it does. It's, uh, it's a tough place, There's simple things that would help, like riding the subway and not being shouted at by the person who has the microphone who, is telling you what the next station is. I mean, that would really go a long way to making things a lot better.
More civilized.
But, in 2026, I have been getting on the train as recently as just days ago, and the person is irritated. It seems hateful. It seems like they want to torture people, and you can't really understand what they're saying, and they shout, they shout it out, and you just see these beaten people who can't turn it off because there's a speaker in every car.
Yeah. Well, can't people read?
All right, let's proceed.
Okay. Now, just a moment. I've got my little pages here that I've prepared for this. I sent off your book, by the way.
It has arrived, and I'm looking forward to. I have a very comfortable chair, and
Good.
I plan on sitting in the chair and reading it from cover to cover.
Well, it's certainly an interesting story. I mean, it really is. And it's really quite a counterpoint to the whole trajectory of most collectors in America, art collectors, who were centered basically in one sort of establishment or another. And Barnes was totally outside of any establishment. The book I sent you is Walker Evans, Decade by Decade. I've had such trouble with your address. I didn't have any trouble with the address this morning when I sent it. Cool. So hopefully, it's coming Tuesday, they said.
Great. Okay.
To you. So let us start with Walker Evans. Just kind of taking the global view first, and then honing down to more specifics. Walker Evans worked for 45 years. He worked from 1927 to 1960. 1973. And in those years, I think that of any one photographer, he really changed the way that both the American art world were and is, with things like all the pop culture of the 1960s coming back to some portions of Evans' work, which venerated popular culture. And also his work begun in 1927 of documenting American culture in the way it really was in rural surroundings and in cities. And the greatest repository of Evans' work today are in the Getty Research Center and the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, in a collection that I had acquired in maybe 1982-83, which was Walker Evans' personal collection. The problem with Evans' work, by and large, is that at the time that he became noted during the 1970s, really, in terms of when the collection of photography really began, was that his collections were seized upon by dealers and then much fragmented. So it's very, very difficult to get largish collections of Evans' pictures, say over 20 or 30 pictures. This great dispersal of this work, went on from perhaps 1972 to 1979, and then his pictures became more scarce. One of the problems of Evans' work is that, unlike the photographs of Ansel Adams and other photographers of great note, is that Evans and Cartier-Bresson, a French photographer of enormous reputation, who worked in France, these two photographers really didn't care very much about print quality. What they created were documents, and it's the documents that were important, not the print quality of those documents. So the interesting thing also about Evans' work was that he's been taken up gigantically by the whole art world, almost universally, everywhere, in museums and publications and all the associated collecting appurtenances that have kind of accrued over the last period since his death, which was just about 50 years ago. And there was in 1995, there was a bibliography that appeared written by a man named Roger Kingston that enumerated something like 1,500 different books and publications related to Evans and his work. What is unique about American 20th century photography, and Walker Evans' work particularly, is that during this period, 20th century American photography marked a movement where American art became the center of the art world from the period of Peggy Guggenheim's opening her gallery in Manhattan after the Second World War onwards. And the center of this new art world was New York. And along with that idea, Peggy Guggenheim's artists she championed became part of this very, very, very valuable today series of paintings done by New York artists who, I don't know, 10, 15 of them lived in a very small area of New York. And some of these paintings that they did by people like Mark Rothko or Jackson Pollock have gone up in price to $200 million plus. And this period also saw the rise, straying a little bit from Walker Evans, saw the rise as art as a new fungible currency, which was universal and portable. I mean, you could take a painting and put it in the Swiss vault and forget about it for 20 years or 30 years, and you came back and it was worth 5 to 10 times what you put the value of that painting when it was first deposited in the Swiss vault. Returning to Evans, his appearance in the photography world began in 1927 and went on until 1973 when he stopped making photographs. He was very, very prolific during the 1930s and less prolific in the Second World War period and onwards. Part of the reason for this was that he was in that very, very, very small group of avant-garde art people who began the Museum of Modern Art in the 1935-36 period. These people felt that photography was an art and it should be represented in a museum, which was a very novel concept in the mid-1930s. With the Museum of Modern Art, Evans somehow emerged as the person that they want to march forward with as their photographer of note, and they gave him a gallery in about 1936 when he put up his first show, and this led to publications of books and reviews and great eventual notice of his work. And he did and participated in a number of modern Museum of Art shows over the next 30, 40 years. The interesting thing about photography during this period, when Evans was being discovered, is that you could go to let me see, any museum in America and ask if they had any photographs, and they would point you to the archives, and museums collected photographs as archival objects. Photographs were seldom even regarded as great documents. They were just kind of also ran documents that were collected quite casually. For Evans, when he began in 1927, he'd returned from Europe in 1927 and began photographing around New York. And his friends and all the people he began to know were all refugees from Europe, from the things that were happening in Europe during the 1930s. And his own journey to France in 1926, I think, really set in motion what he documented and what he would finally wind up doing in his life. At that point, there was a French photographer named Eugène Auger who had documented Paris from around 1900 onwards. He was a street photographer, and he sold photographs to artists and publishers. In 1927, he died. He starved to death. He had a very, very difficult life in Paris. And a young woman named Bernice Abbott was living in the same area as he was. And she saw him and met him and talked about photography. And they were both doing photography. She was Man Ray's printer at that point. Bernice was looking around for Auger in 1927, and she couldn't find him, and she found out that he died. And somehow she traced back to where all of his negatives were and got involved in saving his negatives. And the reason this is interesting is because 1926, 1927 is when Walker Evans was in Paris. So he saw these photographs during his career. He would always say, well, Auger was very, very important to my vision because this is, Auger photographed the architecture and the people and the goings-on of Paris for 25 or 30 years. And when Evans began working, he was met by a man named Lincoln Kirstein, who was a young Harvard graduate. And they started doing a Victorian house survey project. No one had ever done anything like this in America. And I think that they began that, with a reference, both of them, to Auger's work in Paris and in France, but mostly in Paris. Lincoln Kirstein became one of the notable figures of the whole avant-garde art movement and in the ballet world. He was one of the monuments men after the Second World War, and he was very, very, very early supporter, and perhaps the earliest supporter of Walker Evans and his work. Evans came out of college, went to Europe, then came to live in New York, and struggled to make ends meet. In 1935, he got a commission to photograph an expedition made by some Americans to Tahiti. And so he made a very interesting document of Tahiti in 1935. He then came back, and he'd been photographing vernacular American architecture in the manner of Auger. And the Farm Security Administration began as a government relief project to try to document what the American farmers and the rural Americans were going through in the Depression. And this project, known as the Works Projects Administration, WPA, documented all of the kind of, I would say, the misery of what was happening in rural America during the period 1936 to 1940. And Evans was one of the key photographers of that group of people. And his work done during the period of the WPA is, I think, probably the foundational work of American photography, because the roots that he put down at that point were just so different and so incredible and so precise. For the most part, these photographs were first brought out in the Museum of Modern Art Connection, then in books, and then the wider circulation of those photographs with their deposit at the Library of Congress for the whole file of Works Projects Administration photographers' work done during that period. And for the next 30 years, you could get, as a member of the public, any of this work. You could get a Walker Evans, more or less, vintage print by sending $1 into the Library of Congress, and they would send you a print of one of his 1,000 or so pictures he'd taken. It might be 500 pictures, I don't know the exact number. but nevertheless, you can personally get a really good print from the Library of Congress. During this period, after the 1940s, Evans was one of the key people in Fortune magazine and Henry Luce's publishing world. And essentially for a period of 30, maybe 35 years, from 1940 onwards, Evans became the center of the Fortune photography effort. This glorious magazine that the Luce group published, I think, through the 40s. I'm not sure when it was closed down, but it was certainly from maybe 1938 onwards. And during that period, Evans made a number of essays of Chicago and the rural South and Coney Island and all sorts of things, and had what very few photographers in America had, which was a steady income. One of his interesting points about Evans' career was that being in New York, the New York photography world was a very, very small group of people, not more than 25, 30 people. And they all knew each other. The cross-fertilization of careers was really quite incredible. I think that kind of openness to all sorts of people that he met during that period, as few of them as there were. Evans' work is a curiosity, that you have maybe 7-year periods when his photography would radically change. And the reason why his work is so fresh today across his 45-year career is because he got involved in the work of other photographers, and he got involved in different visions. Most photographers more or less do the same thing during their entire careers, and you can plot a very, very kind of connected line of their work. With Evans, he goes through these 7-year, 8-year periods where his work and even his subject matter changes greatly. And so, for example, he got involved with Robert Frank, who was a young Swiss photographer who arrived in America in 1955. And these people all supported each other in that group. Many of them got Guggenheim fellowships, like Robert Frank, which gave him the money to go off. Gave Frank the money to go off and photograph America, rural America in 1955, which resulted in a monumental body of work that Frank did. His other associations were with Bernice Abbott, who was also a photographer who lived nearby to him in New York for 30 or 40 years. And if you go through the various books written on Evans, there are all those associations of all the photographers who were in his circle. And that circle was just basically modern American photography, because the center of that was New York. And I think the interesting thing about Evans was that he really think about why has Evans been so popular? Why is his work so accessible? Why is everybody think that he is the great photographer of 20th century America? I think the reason is because every child 10 years old can tell you what a good photograph is. It's really amazing today to look at children who take photographs and they all compare each other. to their photographs with each other. And what's the great photograph that I've taken? And there's this exchange about visual literacy at a very early age in America. And the interesting thing about Evans is that he sat at the absolute center of the photography world for such a long period of time. And it's amazing to me that apart from his salary, I mean, he didn't live very well. He certainly didn't have the income of the fashion photographers, like Avedon and people like that, or Irving Penn. I mean, I would think that Evans became, at times, I say, very bitter about the neglect that he faced from after the period he stopped working with the Loose magazine group. He was really banging on empty at the last maybe 4 or 5 years of the decade of the 50s. And fortunately for him, he got a teaching position at Yale. And I had met him during that period of the 60s. And the friends that he had were all the Yale group. And I remember he would have, somebody told me that he had his own idiosyncratic ways about him. He'd have his classes. He lived in an outlying town around New Haven. He'd come in for his classes. And he was then in his 60s, and he went to a hotel, and he said, I come here, and then I have to do my classes, and I'm getting a little tired. Evans just drank way too much all during his life and smoked too much. And so around, 1 o'clock, he'd get very tired, so he would go to his hotel room. He rented space in the hotel room, I think for $1 for each day that he spent 2 hours sleeping in his hotel room. And he never turned down the bed. Part of the deal was that he wouldn't rumple the covers. He'd just come and sleep. So, I mean, it shows you how thrifty Mr. Evans was. What happened then later to him in the mid-'60s is photography began to get real traction in terms of the dealers. And photographs by Evans were much required for all the collectors. And so he began to get a dealer behind him, or 2 or 3 dealers behind him. And he started making increasing trips to England, where he took photographs. And he was, at that point, very good friends with Robert Lowell. And all through his life, he'd had connections with literary figures. And the interesting thing, coming from California, where there were works project administration photographers working and living, Evans was kind of the greatest icon of American photography. So, even as a fairly young teenager, I knew of his work, and I never thought that I would ever meet him, which I did, and get involved in collecting his work, which I did. I think the greatest problem with Evans today is that apart from the big collections, it's very difficult to see his photographs. The Met had bought the rights to his photographs and his estate. I think that's somewhat clouded because the people who had ownership of that estate were just casual people that he had known and said, "Oh, would you like, to be one of my heirs?" And his very casual approach to print quality, I think, put him in juxtaposition with most of the photographers who were being represented in galleries. It was glorious objects. What I'd like to do is I'd like to turn this over to Ian and ask him if he has any questions for me.
Yeah, I'd like to know if Walker Evans did any writing as well. Did he keep a diary, or did he write letters? Were letters preserved, or did he not pick up a pen at all, or did he pen a book? Did he express himself in writing?
Well, I think he wanted to be a writer. I mean, he went to Paris in 1927 thinking that he wanted to be a writer. And so he was very, very involved in letters, and very involved in making comments about things that he saw and things that he participated in. But he never really put himself forward as a formal literature, because the people that he knew were mostly artists who were mostly writers, and his concentration was on his photography, not on the written word. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay. Another question I have is if you could tell me just a little bit more about the Library of Congress, when I think you said for $1 or for a nominal amount of money, people could get their own copies of some of his photography.
Yes, there was this group of 10 photographers, and the Works Project Administration, you can look it up on Google. It gives you the names of all the photographers and their layers of interest. The Library of Congress was key to this Works Project Administration effort that was made. There was a designated head of the project. Roosevelt was very involved in all this. Eleanor Roosevelt, particularly, I think, was involved in this. And the output, all the photographs made by the Works Project Administration were designated to go to the Library of Congress and form, along with the Civil War photographs of the Brady Group, the kind of key foundation, the key photographic foundations of the collections. For years, if you'd wanted to find out about the Library of Congress collections, all you had to do was buy the guide to the Library of Congress collections, published for $1.25, like the photographs were $1.25. And you could look up their deposits, and there's a little subheading there for the Works Project Administration. The idea of the project was to really document the scope of the destitution of rural America in lives of sharecropper farmers in the South. Evans lived with a sharecropper family, or lived close by to a sharecropper family in the South for weeks and weeks, and took photographs of them. There's some of his most poignant pictures of the Depression, which he took. There was a whole subsection in Evans' work of the condition of Black people in America, and he was very interested in that, and he documented that more than most. The project ranged from the Deep South to the architecture of the poorest people and the grandest people in the South. There were maybe 4 or 5 of these photographers who were photographing in the South. I believe that Dorothy Lang and people like that were working in California and somewhat in the Midwest. And there's a copious literature about the Works Project Administration. I think that you should start with Wikipedia. They've done a really good job in that area describing it. And the problem in speaking about it is it just became so vast. It became so important. There's been so much written about it. Strangely, not many people know about it.
Just before we move past this, may I go back for a moment?
Sure.
You know, I'm interested in the Library of Congress offering to the public the opportunity to get their own prints. And there was a time around, I guess about 1969, where I just put a stamp on an envelope as a little kid myself, and I sent it to Boston Garden in Boston, Massachusetts, and I wrote a letter to a hockey player named Bobby Orr. And I was shocked as a kid that in the mail one day when I came home was a photograph, a black and white photograph of a hockey player with a buzz cut haircut, and that they had, sent me something back. So I'm really interested that a government institution would send people photos. And how long did that last? Is there anything like it today? Did you ever send them a letter and request prints? And did anybody realize, this is an opportunity for me to make my own collection just by sending a little bit of money or putting stamps on envelopes and requesting all these great photographs?
I can tell you're not a member of the 1940s generation. The precursor of this were press agents. And so if you wanted to have a photograph of Roy Rogers and Dale and Trigger, their horse, all you had to do was write Roy Rogers, Los Angeles, and the press agent would get that and send you Roy Rogers photographs. And every actor in Hollywood had a press agent, and you could get their photographs. I don't know whether they were free, or I can't imagine that people who were paying 25 cents to see a movie was going to send off $1 for a picture of Clark Gable. But I think this was a postal tradition of supplying photographs over a long, long period of time. The long period of time probably is when movies started in 1910 or so. The Library of Congress, going back to the Library of Congress, when you and I first met each other, I was working on a project being done by your stepmother, Adelaide de Menil, in East Hampton. And the idea that I had when I came into the project was they were photographing the communities of the fishing families in East Hampton who had come there in the 1630s, and the community still existed. When I came onto the project in about 1982, maybe 1981, I thought to myself, well, how great to be able to do a project like the Works Project Administration with folklorists, with photographers, with all the people who were in Eastern Long Island, who were part of the media. We could get a writer to write up a book eventually, which happened. We came out with a book called, Men's Lives. And Peter Matheson wrote that book. And he was a writer who lived in East Hampton, knew the fishing community. I think he'd been part of the fishing community as a fisherman at a certain point. So we hired about 10 photographers, famous, documentary photographers, really wonderful people who got involved in the project. And at the end of the project, we had amassed, Adelaide and myself were working as the driving force behind this, and Ted, your father, was working at the same time, supporting the idea of the project. At the end of the project, we had 176,000 negatives, which I knew the Library of Congress people because I worked there a lot. And I said, would you take this incredible collection? They said, oh, yes, we'd love to. So I think that the Library of Congress has done a very good job over the years of collecting photographs, certainly in the last generation or two, more actively than they were. It fell off, hugely after the Civil War. But then it began again, I think, probably in the 30s with the Farm Security Administration. I don't know if that answers your question. Hope it does a little bit.
Did you write a letter and ask for the Lone Ranger's photo, or for Tonto or Trigger?
Oh, yes. No, I had my little collection of famous glossy photographs made of famous actors. Wow. I don't know. I think these mailings, and sometimes we're like 6,000 people were on those mailing lists. So a lot of the agents would just have people, these poor ladies who would stuff envelopes of the world's famous actors at that point.
That would be called fan mail at the time, right?
Yes, all that fan mail stuff, yeah.
Wow. But requesting something from the Library of Congress would be beyond a Hollywood fan. So would that have been more an academic thing, or was that what newspapers would do when they wanted a photo and they wanted to publish something? Would newspapers make these requests?
No, I was really surprised. The answer to this is, as I started doing books and started doing documentation, you have no idea the number of people in America who are interested in photographs and interested in various history moments in photographs. And so, I'm really surprised that I get letters from people who say, oh, yes, I collected this photograph from the Library of Congress, and I've got this, and I've got this, and I've got that. And, just everywhere I went in America, there were people who availed themselves of the Library of Congress and their deposits. I mean, it's quite extraordinary.
Wow. I get it. Incredible. So about Walker Evans, just something that it occurred to me. I love seeing these photographs of the cars, and sometimes I'm amazed that they look like brand new. Other times there's a coating of dust on them. Other times you wonder how some of these cars can even keep moving, unless they're photographs of rusted cars in a field, for example, which have been discarded. But did Walker Evans have a driver's license, do you know? Did he drive himself?
Oh, I'm sure he did. I mean, I don't think you could be an American and not have a driver's license, could you? I mean, until the whole inundation of immigration in America, which started probably in the 60s or 70s. Mm-hmm. And, then you had problems of how do you get a driver's license and what's your address. The difficult things of, minorities in America have been with us for a really long time. I did a project in the early 60s with the farm workers, and the march up from Southern California on the part of the farm workers to Sacramento to petition the government to help them. At the time that they did this march, the Delano March, that whole march was staged and began with 25 or 30 people just walking from out of the fields on Sacramento. And do you know what they were marching for? Nobody knows this.
What?
A 10-cent an hour raise in the minimum wage. And I think the thing about that, I felt when I was taking those photographs, how many people are taking photographs of this? Not many. People go out for a day and see the people marching and, leave after 10 minutes. But if you followed them, it was really pretty incredible. I'd made a film of California in the 1960s of all my. I had worked on a project with Dorothea Lange that she intellectually thought out and said, I want to do a project 30 years after the Farm Security Administration. And what I want to do is I want to find out, where we've all gone in California, particularly after that period. So she unfortunately died, and so I did the project myself. I was invited to come teach at Harvard at one point, and I'd done this project with Dorothea, and I'd initially thought of it as a film project, but the project, is just so vast. There's so many places and so many people that I decided finally I would use my photographs, and I made a film out of that work. It's called California Manufacturing the Future. And YouTube has it. You can just log on YouTube, use my name, Clark Worswick, Worswick, and you'll be able to see that film. They'll send it to you.
Great.
And it's, it's our project, and it's very interesting that it survives. I mean, I made it 50 years ago.
Did Walker Evans make a film?
That's a really interesting question. I get him confused with Cartier-Bresson because, they're kind of mixed up in my mind, being the same period and working, in various phases of documentation. Cartier-Bresson actually made a film called Le Retour, which is The Return, after all the people got out of being slave laborers of the Germans and the French, and all the people went back to their houses. That's what the film is about. And the answer about Walker Evans is no, I'm not aware of any films that he made.
I did a kind of quick check with AI here, and apparently he made at least one personal film around 1932 called Travel Notes, and apparently it says it was experimental personal work, and more I don't know, but
yeah. Well, no, I'd never heard of that. One of the things about artists of that period is they were trying everything. And that probably goes back to Russia, with all the state-sponsored relationships that artists had with the government in one way or another. I mean, graphic arts and film, with Eisenstein and all the painters and all sorts of people were doing sponsorship projects.
I have a question about Walker Evans and government. Did he take photographs of government figures, presidents or mayors or law enforcement or FBI agents? And
no.
Okay.
However, the big however is, when he went to work as a free agent after the Works Project Administration, he began a photographer doing work associated with his fortune work. So he would photograph corporate figures, heads of this company, heads of that company, and they're by and large just portrait projects. I mean, that's the only thing that I knew of that kind of thing. There was this huge layering in the government between if you worked for this or you worked for that department or the Army or everything. There was very little interchange between government departments. So somebody who's taking photographs, they'd have to say, well, what is the purpose of this? And there was never an overriding purpose for it, so I don't think it got done.
Did he also do work, as they say, just to pay the bills? Because when it comes to doing the photo documentary type of work, were those contract jobs, or was it him just taking his own equipment and paying the costs himself, or was he contracted to create a series besides the farm administrative?
I mean, basically, his photographs were self-generated photographs. I mean, he would take photographs of his friends. He'd take, I think there are a few wedding photographs that he took. His work is by and large self-generated, and generated by his various interests at the moment, whether they were, art was architecture in Chicago, or kilns, and how things were, pots and dishes were manufactured, and things that he would sort of run into when he was working for Fortune. But there were, if you go through the Fortune articles that he was associated with, and I would believe that on Wikipedia they would have some reference to that, you can see what the kind of associative work would be. He for example, one day he decided, I will walk out of my building, whatever the Time Life building is, where it is. It's 49 Fifth Avenue, I think, or 6th Avenue. And I will go around Midtown Manhattan for, weeks and maybe months, taking photographs of people's costumes. So he did this whole costume survey of the way people were dressing in 1960, 61. I mean, those were his kind of self-interested projects. He also documented a little bit the reconstruction of Manhattan. Strangely, I would have thought that Bernice Abbott would have done more of those things, but her interests were mostly completed buildings, where Evans are more or less, here is where a block of townhouses used to be, and now there is a 60-story building. So he would photograph the destruction of the buildings, and then the vacant lot.
I am going to make sure that this is not being destructed, so let's just take 1 minute, and I want to check that everything's been recorded so far.
Great, good, Ian. Thank you.
Hold on, let's start now.
Okay, one of the things that, as I go through my notes here, that is interesting about Evans is that the preponderance of interest in Evans is his 1930s work, works project administration period. From, let me see, from 1941 to about 1973 is a very large portion of his work. It's mostly unknown. It's mostly uncollected, because it's now, his estate has been so shattered with so many photographs going off to various different things when he began selling his photographs in, say, 1970 to make an income so he could live. And in the collection that I have, his personal collection, there's quite a bit of work about the things that are were not done in that 1930 period. And the interest of I think that collection is that there's so much of his work is really unknown still to this day. The first book that I did was called Walker Evans: The Lost Work. And this struck me when I got involved in that collection, that so much of this work, as I've just said, is just unknown. And there are very scarce prints of it. in this collection, and in anyone's collection. I saw a couple of days ago a 1945 picture of a Chicago tenement had come up for auction. It was a wonderful photograph, and I said to myself, well, how many prints of this actually exist? And I don't think I've seen another one. And so maybe 2 or 3 prints of that exist. I mean, there's these uncollated years of Evans' work from 1941 to the end of his work in 1971 or 72, when he took up working briefly in Polaroids. Really remain kind of a mystery, and I think that there's a huge amount of work to do there. I think that the problems that I've had as a collector, I don't mean to whine. Maybe I'm whining. I did a really big wrap-up exhibition in Cincinnati of the work that I published in Walker Evans' The Lost Work. And my friend James Crump, who was the curator at the Cincinnati Art Museum, wanted to get involved in doing a big Walker Evans exhibition. What this has resulted in is that nobody, except for the Getty and myself, have collections which go from 1927 to 1972, 73. And one of the things that is so strange about Evans is that we could not get a single museum in America to take that exhibition that we did in Cincinnati, because it was a single owner collection. And this paranoia went on to the point that this is a 250-page book, and there are only 3 sentences in the entire book that even notice that, or make note of the fact that this came from my wife Joni and my own collection. And this kind of is a paranoia of museums saying, oh, we're showing these, we're showing single owner collections, and the collectors are making lots of money from this because, we're their stooges. Well, what happened next from Cincinnati is some of the most noted museums in Europe, 6 of them, took the exhibition, which toured then for 3 years, and it finished up in the great Berlin Museum, Gropiusbau. The exhibition had 230 pictures in it, and it was in 6 of their gigantic 25-foot tall galleries. It's just an extraordinary exhibition. Nothing like that has ever been done in America. And it's because of the bureaucracy in the museums that's grown up around Walker Evans. And, I'm not going to live long enough to be able to see, this change. But I mean, it's a shame that these weird bureaucracies have grown up. And I think, personally, I think the Metropolitan Museum of Art is, responsible for a lot of this. But, who knows? I mean, the whole thing is really strange. My wife, Joni, came from a family that had a big house in outside of Philadelphia, and her collateral had been the head of J.P. Morgan for 30 years. And so Churchill had said to the people in New York and the people in the Metropolitan Museum, you should remove all your pictures, from Manhattan, because you're going to be bombed by the Germans. So they packed up the whole museum and put it in Johnny's house outside of Philadelphia. And, just unbelievable. And, on the other hand, the curators, there, I don't think have ever even done, an exhibition about this extraordinary moment. Anyway, don't mean to carp.
I'd like to ask you something that not only do you know about Walker Evans, but you actually met him at some point too, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, no. I met him because I knew one of his best friends. And he was he was a very private person, I think, and he didn't, at least to me, a 25-year-old when I met him, seemed to be terribly interested in talking about very much. I mean, he is, like a lot of films and people in the film world, you stake out your own private life, very carefully, and you don't make lots of friends. And, he seemed to be a very well-dressed, very collected, very buttoned-up person, who at that point was going through his life as a semi-famous person.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that at one point he liked to drink, he liked to smoke. Was it ever considered a problem, or was it something that he managed in moderation?
Well, he evidently didn't manage it in moderation because it's what killed him.
Okay, so you mean he died of cancer or died of something related to alcohol or smoke?
Well, I mean, he disintegrated his insides by his alcohol. I don't think the combination of cigarettes and alcohol is very good for you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my impression is he was a very sick man.
Mm.
And the people I know who knew him, don't talk about it very much because it's sad to see, somebody into the later stages of their life, like that.
Some photographers might just have a brief shooting star type of career, but it seems like you can even look at his work and say the work that he did in the 30s, the work that he did in the 40s, the 50s, 60s, even 70s. So is that accurate, that he had that much of a breadth over time, that you can look at his work in terms of not only the year, but in terms of a decade?
Well, from whatever I said about Walker, I was being buttoned up. He was an extraordinary artist, the likes of which America, I don't think, has ever seen before and probably will never see again, because his vision crossed so many boundaries, which I never realized that they crossed so many boundaries until I got involved in looking at these photographs that I got. I mean, most photographers photograph in a very linear fashion, a set group of, pictures, which are all kind of a linear projection of the vision. Evans worked across 5 or 6 whole genres really, really well. And his photographs are as extraordinary at the end of his life as they were when he finally defined his vision by, say, 1935, when he went to Tahiti. It's remarkable. I mean, a few painters, have careers like that.
Mm-hmm. And do you think he was striving for authenticity, and in his subjects looking for unspoiled subjects? And is that the goal? Because that's what I get from a lot of it when I look at the photographs and look at the expressions of some of his subjects. I feel that, in a sense, maybe that these people are better than we are, or that they're less contrived. Was he aiming for that?
Well, I think that there's very little artifice in Evans' work. And for a documentary photographer, that's it's very hard to do that, because you're creating a document of an object, and the object only appears to be one way. It's what it is. And so with Evans, I don't know, he transcends these subjects in some kind of marvelous fashion, which I've never been able to define, except by saying, when he fell into the influence of certain other photographers, which he certainly did, his photography just really shifted, to being his unique take on whatever he was taking a photograph of. And I mean, I think that's his artistry.
So I'm always curious about the tripod. Now, we've seen the tripod ever since photographs themselves have been taken. But did he ever spend a lot of time without a tripod?
I don't think that I know of anything that he ever took photographs with a tripod, except for his African art collection that he documented. Mm-hmm. And I think he documented that, and I'm not sure about that. All these facts can be checked, in the literature of, why he did that African series of African sculpture and who it was made for, and all the, the appurtenance of that. He had to use a tripod because he had to center the art up. And photography was wed to the tripod because the cameras were so big, and the times to make the exposure, in the 19th century were so long. I mean, I have a photograph taken in 1872 in the middle of a temple at Mount Abu in 1872 by a man named Colin Murray. He's sitting in the photograph inside the temple, and he must have sat there for 2 hours during the exposure. Mm-hmm. Because he wanted to take a photograph of this incredible interior made in this temple. That the sculptures were paid in gold dust for the amount of marble dust that they took out of the temple at a certain point. And the marvel of the temple is, what the sculpture, interior is. So he used a tripod, and that's why, Samuel Bourne in the 1860s went to these photographic expeditions to the Himalaya with 60 coolies to carry his tripods, his chemicals. The photographic plate would have to be coated with an albumin substance and with light-sensitive materials. And then is known as a wet plate collodion photograph. The camera had to be mounted on a tripod, and the exposures were probably anywhere from 5 minutes to 20 minutes. So you had to have a tripod.
How much do we know from Walker Evans' own mind? Was he interviewed a lot on television or on the radio?
To my mind, there were very few interviews with Evans. Leslie Katz during the 1970s, I believe, made a long, maybe 30-page interview with him. But the first person interviews with Evans are to my mind what I've seen. I mean, I certainly am no expert on that subject, so don't take what I'm saying. The only one that I've read that is substantial is Katz's interview.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What does he say in that interview?
Oh, Evan, I've read so many artist interviews. 1,000, 5,000. I couldn't possibly tell you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let me do a double check here that we're recording, and I think that you want to say for today about Walker Evans? I feel like we're just sort of scratching the surface, and we haven't described specific series of works. And is that the way to begin to understand him, is to look at things in terms of a body of work, and avoid talking about individual photographs, or a bit of both, or there are no...
I think that the problem in talking about photographs is that, this is whatever it might be, in my opinion. And I think that there's such a large chasm in the hagiography, in the whole posthumous world of Evans, that there are not that many people who actually met him and knew him. And I think it's better to sort of get into maybe asking why he did these things, and how he did these things, and how he survived in his life, and who he married, and how he got divorced, and all of those kinds of things. I think it's one of the sad things of my life is I had arranged to do a film on Diane Arbus, and we were all set to go down to her loft, where she lived. And the week before she died, the week before she died, the week before I was going to start my film, she committed suicide. Mm-hmm. And so, I did a lot of work on her and all the rest of this, and I just said, well, I'm doing films, and television is sort of films, and, doing interviews and recording them is sort of television. And it's now segged into this interview. And I think there's just, for me, there's a world out there of photography, to talk about. And it's just a matter of us ordering ourselves and working out the things to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did Walker Evans, one question, did he ever spend time trying to document Skid Row?
I'm tempted to say he lived on Skid Row all of his life. Oh. No, I mean,
because the photographs of people who just don't are unable to find work are different than people who are hanging out at the pool hall, or shooting up, or trying to avoid the police.
Well, I used to be a street photographer in New York, so I know what I'm speaking about. Yes, I mean, the problem with taking photographs of bums is that, they're not happy people, and they're living marginal lives, and I think their histories and how they got to that point is more interested than their condition. Mm-hmm. And, here is, are photographers who spent around 1900, Lewis Hine, people like that, who spent, their whole working life, working with immigrant families who were living in tenements. And so that's really a different period of photography. And, when I came to New York, I lived very poorly because I didn't have much money. I'd much rather spend my money on fares going to India and Asia than living in the Valencia Hotel on 8th Street, poorly. And
8th Street and what? Down in the Lower East Side?
Yeah, it's right across from Cooper Union.
Okay.
Cooper Union's across the street.
But that's a fantastic area.
Well, it is. That's why I lived there.
Yeah.
But, I didn't live very well.
Isn't that where McSorley's Tavern is? Like one of the...
Yeah, it was, yeah. Right. Yeah, it was down a block or two.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that area very much.
And it was, I was there during the blackout in 1964 or 65 or 66, whatever it was. And the library was about a block or two away. And I went there during the blackout, and there were all the bums in the library stealing the books.
Oh.
Horrible.
So that library, was that on the side of Washington Square Park?
I don't know. I mean, I've been so many places. Topographically, it's all kind of mixed up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was much simpler in Tokyo in 1959 and 1960 because you could find a house because there weren't many houses left from the firebombing of Tokyo.
Mm-hmm. Were you in Tokyo in the 50s?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
In the early 60s, yeah.
Wow. Do you have photographs that you took from those places?
I have. I was shooting with a Rolleiflex then, and the Rolleiflex didn't really suit me, but I didn't realize it when I was taking photographs. So, the Rolleiflex is a 2.25 camera, and you have to compose things very carefully to be able to get anything. And you're looking down a waist-high viewfinder, which is really hard because you got to get all those lines and all those things wound up in the right proportion. And I have, 5 remarkable photographs of Japan during that period, but I just limited by the goddamned equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Vietnam to take photographs just at the first moments that American forces went there. And I was treated very badly by the Vietnamese who didn't like Europeans in Saigon. So I left, and I formed a hatred for, at that point, I mean, the Vietnamese were going through a lot of, never going back to Vietnam. And then I was offered a gig by the head of the look photography department, who I met through Charlie Coles, because his father owned Look magazine, and he offered me a job of being Look magazine's photography guy in Vietnam, which I unfortunately didn't take. I'll tell you about it sometime.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spent most of my time in India and the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And Afghanistan, Pakistan, because it was just much more accessible, and there's a lot more to take photographs of.
Well, I've always wondered about a place, Sri Lanka, and I can't quite figure out. I just know that it's a place that I want to learn more about.
Well, 2 things I would say. Call it Ceylon. Don't call it Sri Lanka.
Oh, Sri Lanka. Ceylon. Okay.
And
is that to improve my chances of staying alive? Is there...
Oh, no. I mean, of the 3 or 4 places in the world I would still go, I've been to Ceylon a couple of times. And it's wonderful. Go there now. Get some money and go there now. Everybody's going to start going there. Because the people are very nice. They speak English. It's easy to get around. It's not very expensive. And the people are going to be flushed out of Southeast Asia. All the Europeans are all going to wind up in Ceylon, so you have about a year to go to Ceylon.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I'm not going to probe you with my ignorance.
You're not ignorant. You're very, tuned into a lot more things than I am.
Yeah.
Therefore, you're not as ignorant as I am.
I've seen some photos of Ceylon, and what's the distinction? Why did it go from Sri Lanka to Ceylon? Is that a political? Were there wars or civil wars that made that change?
Well, I'll explain something about Indian Asia to you. It's very simple. Bombay is no longer Bombay. Everybody who was involved in Bombay, which is the big city on the west side of India, um, they used to go to this place called Bombay. There was a political cartoonist who decided to start a political party in the 70s who wanted a real old-fashioned, authentic Bombay name. So he renamed the city Mumbai. Now, the only thing that has a relationship to the word Mumbai is it used to be a mud bank outside of a tidal mud bank outside of what the city that I used to know as Bombay, and it was politically the people who lived there wanted to have an authentic, name, Western Indian name, so it's now Bombay.
What was wrong
Madras,
you mean it's now Mumbai?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, for about 2 years, I wanted to go back to Madras in southern India because they have a great museum there, and it's a kind of great place to base yourself for tours of South India. But I couldn't find any. Literally, this happened to me. I couldn't find any airplanes or railroads or anybody, who was actually going to Madras. And so finally I worked it out that, they just changed the name to Chennai. It's no longer Madras anymore. So I spent all this time trying to think about going to Chennai, not Madras. And Calcutta was renamed Calcutta. So anyway, there's this, Burma is now Myanmar. And, Thailand is still Thailand.
I like following stylistic changes and knowing when they happened. I think it's very helpful in getting things right. And even the American way of spelling and pronouncing Tokyo changed. I think once upon a time it was Tokyo and spelled Tokio, and then somebody said, no, if you want to get it right, it's Tokyo, and they put the Y in there instead of the I. But little things like that, I think they help to know.
Well, when the Chinese came in, the communists came in, they changed the whole orthography of China. So I don't go to China anymore because I can't figure out where all these places are on the map. They changed all the maps.
And starting with the capital, right? It used to be called Peking, and today it's called Beijing. Was that a political change by the communists?
Yes, because they changed it all over to a totally different type of orthography. And so the people that I know of my generation who write about it and who spend time there just don't go anymore, or it's impossible. I can't locate where anything is. I mean, southern China is now Shenzhen. So,
What was it before that?
Well, it's the areas outside of Hong Kong.
Was that Canton?
And Macau.
Uh-huh. Well, I know that area is close to Hong Kong. It's a few minutes from Hong Kong, and Shenzhen is their electronics area right now. But I've always been curious about an area that was called Canton. I don't hear too much about Canton or the Cantonese language.
Well, I don't know what it is now, but I always call it Canton. So if you want to know what it is in the past, just ask me.
Okay.
All about the past names.
Right.
I don't mean to be crusty about this, but it's really something.
All right, I'll put my recorder off, and until next time.
Good.
I don't know.
3 weeks to 3 months, and
Oh.
then they're dumped into remainder land.
Uh,
I mean, movies last longer than that.
mm-hmm.
And it's so cruel because everybody's expecting a big drumbeat with the book and everything. I mean, there are 80,000. There's 80,000 books in America that are coming out every year. And how do you get through that? That book I gave you was one of 10 books selected by the American Library Association as one of the great books of the year out of 80,000. I mean, that'll never happen to me again.
Oh.
I mean, it's just weird. I mean, it really is. And the man who published that book, he had published 100 books with his company. He owned the company. They started to have trouble, and it was a period when everything in America is cyclical. And he said, no, I'll get through this. And so he put up his house, took a huge mortgage out on his house, had all the money that he got from getting the mortgage, and put it into the publishing company. And in the next quarter, he had something like say 100 books out there, and he got returns on 98 of them. Mm-hmm. Horrible.
Wow.
And so I don't know. I mean, the publishing world is it's carnivorous, and unless you're backed by a big company, you would think of Knopf. I mean, I have my own imprint at Knopf, which is the top of the mountain.
Yes.
And it, just they said, oh well, Clark, yeah, we'll do these, we'll do this, we'll do this series of 3 or 4 books in an edition of 20,000. How many? What the editions are now?
No, tell me.
So like 1,500.
Huh.
So it's perilous now. I mean, it really is. And I don't know. And I think you're much better off being a reader. And I mean, I'm buying the greatest books in the world on the internet now for $3.98. So I'd much rather be a consumer. I'm going on too long about this. I'm sorry.
No, interesting. It happens in video too. A few days ago I released a video.
I mean, Israel's going to. I don't know if they last the next 10 days. I'll be surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, they're eventually going to hit those desalinization plants, and where are the Jews going to go? They're going to leave. Wherever they go to. I suppose they'll go to Egypt. I mean, that's the only land area they can go. So, who knows? I mean, all these things are happening so quickly, Ian. It's absolutely amazing. It's like, a decade is packed into a 36-hour period.
Yeah, right.
And I don't know. I mean, I personally have many people I can talk to about this. Because, it's so, eventually, you're on the crest of these waves. You're just saying, well, what's next? And, I am at heart, love stories and beginnings, middles, and ends. But these stories are becoming so treacherous. I mean, it just is. It's very sad. I mean, the people in our government are so inadequate. I mean, I can't tell you how inadequate they are. I mean, every congressman should be thrown out of office for their part in all of this for the last 60 years.
I agree completely with you.
Yeah, I mean, and they're,
Well, wait a minute. We just both used 2 absolutes there. And, George Orwell wrote a little book called Politics in the English Language. It's less than, I think it's 33 pages, but he basically says that if we use absolutes too much or we use excessive use of metaphors, that we lose definition of what we're trying to express. If we lose specificity. And so you said all congressmen, whereas maybe you meant 98%. And I said I agree completely, whereas maybe I meant I agree with you 98%, So I don't know what you think of Thomas Massey and Trump's effort to, he just went to Kentucky and supported this guy, Ed Galrain, and who was a former Navy SEAL. But Thomas Massey's very popular right now.
Well, he's great. I mean, he really is.
Yeah.
He's wonderful.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I just think the problems are so overwhelming that by the time, I mean, do you know Bill Browder? Have you ever heard that name?
Sounds familiar, but I haven't. I don't think I've ever heard of him.
He, maybe in the 70s, late 70s, he graduated from Stanford, and he was wondering what to do. His grandfather started the American Communist Party, and he was, very big in politics. It was thrown out of everywhere, his grandfather. Then his father and his generation, three brothers, went and they lived around Chicago, and they became the head of the mathematics departments in all those colleges around Chicago. I mean, very high power family. So Bill Browder went to Stanford, and he decided that he wanted to go into business. You can imagine what his family thought about that.
Oh.
So he looked around for opportunities, and he said, well, there's all the communist countries are all collapsing, and they all have these privatized, they have, these public companies which are being privatized, and basically the governments of these countries are giving all their people shares in all of these companies, and the people are selling the shares for pennies on the dollar. So he went first to Poland and got in trouble in Poland doing privatization of former public companies or private companies the governments had taken over. And then he moved on to Russia during the great breakup of Russia, and started buying shares in these companies that were thought of nothing. And he said, no, what I'm saying is 1,000 times. Which is, and then one of his lawyers was murdered by Putin's faction, and he got all involved. He got thrown out of Russian for dissenting. His lawyers had been murdered, and it's something called the Magnitsky Act was put in Congress to say anyone who's had anything to do with his murder can never come to America. And he was on a blacklist. Anyway, so he became very, well known, and he was wise enough, and this is really interesting, to take up British subjecthood in 30, 40 years ago, and not be an American anymore. Because the Americans would never have defended him, and the British have. And so, they're interesting people who've done interesting things in the last 30 years. But, it's very hard to even begin to think about, where this world is going now, Ian.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just really crazy.
Yes, it is.
I mean, who would have thought that, Iran would go around because of the animosities of the Persians against the Arabs. These are animosities that have lasted for 10,000 years. they would be bombing their water plants. They're just, it's terrible. Anyway, so the Iranians have missiles that go 18,000 miles an hour. Wow. And they navigate erratic courses. So basically all of these missiles are shot down by plotting the course that the rocket is on. But if it's an eccentric, delivery, there's no way you can plot any defense against these things. And that's where the Iranians are. And, the Americans are as stumped as everybody else. And they murdered the leader of the country after formally killing everybody in the government the year before.
It's astounding.
So, it's just incredible.
Right.
And Donald said, we're close to a deal with the Iranians. Well, the only deal they're making is to, kill you, like you killed, their leader. Yep.
I'm on it. I'm following it, and I see how insane it is.
And that's all you can say. It's just crackers. It's just absolutely crackers. I mean, it's just.
I talk to some members of Congress almost weekly.
Right.
And I'm not happy that I do that or that I'm in any way involved with it at all. But we're at a crazy. I think of it like this. As a community, we gave the best arrows and spears, or call it, we gave a $200 million budget for Glocks, a really good pistol, so that you could form an inner army for yourself. And we gave you also military gear equipment. I'm talking about the Department of Justice. And we've given you the authority as commander-in-chief of all the best weapons that we've been able to put together through a lot of bloodshed since before the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. We're going to entrust you with this incredible authority and power, and your job is to protect the people who follow the law. That's what your job is. And now you are not following basic law, like in Pam Bondi's case.
Yes.
And this is an incredible position, and I sometimes tell people, well, listen, man, if you have a car, or if you don't, I'll get on the train, I'll meet you in Washington, and let's go and arrest some of these people, or you need to deputize me, or we need to talk to the Secret Service and say, what the hell are you guys doing providing protection for this person? And don't give me you've got kids in college and a mortgage to pay anymore. I mean, it's a bizarre situation where we haven't built a safety into our system. What happens when our leader is being blackmailed by a foreign power? What do you do?
That's what it is, too.
Right.
It's apparent that Mr. Trump had a hand, if was not the instigator of the demise of his friend.
Oh, yeah.
And that's, what Netanyahu, again and again and again, just says, you cross this line and we're going to tell the world.
Exactly. Right. And so I would have hoped that there was something within our, myriad of agencies that would be able to, save the country and avoid having this type of thing happen. I would have, but I don't. I'm getting it. We're just watching the result of nothing like that.
Well, where we are now is Mr. Netanyahu has not been seen for 5 days. And so, the whispers are, maybe he's not alive. Maybe, having Tel Aviv blown up, maybe he's under, a 72-story building, which he'd built his little hidey hole underneath the building. And maybe he's under there somewhere.
Yeah.
And nobody knows. And so where we are is everything that we used to think about communicating, with people, is just getting shredded. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yes.
I mean, it really is amazing. I mean, to the thoughts that, you know, you and I have to think, well, is somebody listening to this call, which I'm sure they are, and will they use this against us? But, you know, fortunately, we don't have any money, and we don't have any power. Nobody knows us. And so, you know, we're like, you know, as to them, we're like a little mosquito. You just slap it and, you know, you go on doing what you're doing.
I think about it all the time. Exactly like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just is a weird moment, you know? I mean, it really is. Because all the things that anybody's ever said about paranoia, it's like, you know, 200 times worse. And, you know, and so I remember having this conversation with an Argentinian, God, I don't know, during the terror in the 70s. And he was an editor, and I was working with him. He's one of my employees. And I said, well, how do you feel about what's happening in Argentina? And he said, I am absolutely speechless what's happening. I can't even talk about it. It's just so dreadful. And the only thing I can say, Clark, is that God help you if your country gets into the same situation my country's gotten into. And so I have never forgotten that conversation. And here we are. Because it's unexplainable what's happened. It's like Homo sapiens, you know, absolute panic, where everything, you know, our whole operating system of reasoning has collapsed. You know, and, I mean, it's just weird.
Yeah.
And, you know, there is another side to this. I mean, there really is. And I think what this is all dependent upon is, you know, controlling all the various forces in America that supply all the sustenance to America, all the water and the electricity and everything. And when the services begin to break down, people will begin to get more serious.
That's right. That's right.
And, you know, saying this is directly affecting me. I hear somebody's come in. I hear the rustling is of a bag. Oh my God, look, that's a big bag. This is my friend Ian, whom you know.
Ian Carter.
Yes.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
Good. Hi, Gail.
I'm sorry. I'm just laughing. The reason I'm laughing is because life just goes on, Ian. It really does. It really does. I've had these conversations before. poor guy in the bank. He's the guy that sits in the first desk in the bank, and everybody comes with improbable questions. So I don't know. I mean, this is we're in a strange moment. Anyway,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question about that picture. what is the date that people that your father ascribed to the dates of that picture to?
Well, he never spoke about it, and people gave me different analysis of it. I remember being early on told it was from the time of before Christ, and that was what was so interesting to me. But later on, I went to a dealer who said, "Oh, it's maybe 600 years old." And then that dealer would be somebody in right off Central Park, Fifth Avenue, something Howard Rose or something. And then then I put it into AI. In other words, I took a high quality photo of it and I put it into AI, and AI said it was around the time of Christ or even before the time of Christ. So at a certain point, that's the answer. More than that is me, wishful thinking or speculating or pretending that I've done a proper test on it. And I haven't. So I was told it was from the time of Christ. A dealer told me it was more like 600 years old. And then a recent AI examination, which I gave you. Actually, you should keep the email that I sent with that analysis of it, said that it was a couple of thousand years or more old.
Because I don't think I ever got that.
Okay, I can find it again and send it again. Yeah.
Could you do that?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I don't know, the problem with all of these things is that you go back to the original dealers and where it came from. And then, that's, I guess, where you start on those things.
Well, Ted got it. I don't know who he got it from. Addie probably doesn't know at this point either. But he got that 60 years ago.
Wow. Yeah. Well, see, that would be the time frame. Because I remember I was in Mexico when I was, 17, 18 on an expedition. And just incredible things were coming up. I mean, they really were. And everyone was just agog. What in the hell is this? Mm-hmm. And so the range of dates really went the same parameters. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. It really went from 600 to 3,000. Mm-hmm. What Olmec was and what everything was. I mean, nobody knew.
Yeah, I had one dealer who said, "Oh, it's deteriorated too much and lost its value," and he said, "We have other ones in much better condition." And what he had were tiny, very small little pieces of kind of replicated imagery rather than this kind of gorgeous, hand drawing or hand painting.
Yeah. So. Well, I mean, the dealers are just hopeless. I mean, I had a dealer up here, I don't know, 2 or 3 days ago, and he's a good guy. He's a European. And I said, well, whatever we're talking about here is speculation, because for the kind of things that I have, there's nobody in Sarasota that would even know or would care about it. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, that's totally true. And I said, well, that goes to the museum also, the curators in the museums. And so, I don't know, I mean, you and I have wandered into a very strange land, but sometimes I think about, and the reason I'm saying that is because you and I have always gone our own way, Ian. Mm. And, there are glories in that, and there are difficulties. And, I think, I was so surprised when I, heard from you, because I thought to myself, I remember you sent me a thing about my last movie. You worked on scoring it. Mm-hmm. And you said, I want to redo the whole movie. Yeah. At that point, spent 2 years on it. And I was in no mood to go and disassemble the building I built.
Right.
And I said, but, I can understand, why Ian would say that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
It'd been horrible for you if I said, yes, that'd be a great idea.
Huh.
Because then you'd have all my problems. Oh dear. Anyway, returning to Walker Evans,
on that piece for a moment, it really could have gone to Menil, but everybody was just a little bit well, maybe starting with me, but I sort of talked to Sean Mooney, and he's very pleasant and everything, but I think Sean is, I get along with Sean real well, but Sean isn't interested in any rehabilitation of Addie.
Yeah.
And he actively works against it, and he's just got the cushiest job of all right now.
Yeah.
Where he just got back from the Vatican, where they let him into all kinds of rooms, and so he's very happy because Adelaide's apartment will be sold, and whatever money they have will go into the Rock Foundation.
Yeah.
And Sean Mooney has not, if I was involved, and I do believe it was Addie's desire as well, has not spent any time thinking about the Rock Foundation sustaining itself through licensing its own works.
Yeah.
Sean hasn't spent any time on properly licensing Adelaide's photos. And, that is really a big part of his job and all the other things that he has authority over to license and to make a profit from. And so I get along with Sean, but I've sort of given up on him. But really, that piece easily could have gone in with the Menil collection, because they have a permanent collection which is called something in surrealism, primitive and surrealism, and it's a really fun room in the Menil collection. Sometimes they call it a museum, sometimes they call it the Menil collection.
Yeah.
But
when, I'm not going to say if, when this all gets out, what they have done to this magnificent lady is going to probably change the way that the court system in New York works, because there's so many people who are in peril in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think of all those buildings, in Park Avenue, of people who are not being very well taken care of, because there are no protocols. I mean, where have you gone to try to get help? I mean, it doesn't exist. It's a desert.
It's a joke, I'll tell you. When I was involved with the court, it was the judges. The judge has someone called a court evaluator, who's an attorney.
No, you told me.
Right, and this woman was absolutely nuts. And then when there was a problem, I thought, okay, no problem. I'm going to find out who runs the integrity in the courts division. And that was one woman. And I said, one of the witnesses, the defendant in this court case, is very violent and has a whole bunch of team who's been harassing me throughout the course of this trial. And they just passed it on to somebody else, another judge who's the court supervisor, and that went to the DA, and it was just one thing after another. And a lot of these people know me by name, and I know them by name. And then it became a point of me thinking, well, I'm going to try to use media exposure. And I've linked up with attorneys around the country who are involved in elder abuse. I've learned they call it the guardianship racket. And New York has 14 guardianship judges, and some of them are just insane. And they call it the isolate and liquidate technique, where once they find their prey, they isolate, they accuse certain family members of doing things for selfish reasons, and then they use their authority as court-appointed attorneys to get into the person's finances and bank account, and they do whatever they want.
Well, I mean, look at what Arnold did. I mean, this is a perfect example. How in hell did he manage that?
Right. Yeah, he ended up taking $100 million and giving Addie something under 20 at the end of the day.
Yeah. And so, I mean, just that alone, if you were to, really nail somebody's skin to the wall,
Wow.
he's such an egregious person, and he's such a emblematic, example of this absolutely, greedy class that in Israel has created their own little private Holocaust, which is, I mean, where I am in that, I am not certain whether Israel will last another 2 weeks. I mean, I really am not, because without water, nobody can live there. It's as simple as that. And the problem in America is without our infrastructure of, all the electricity and water and everything else that runs America, we have the same problems, but we're not in the middle of war. And the people, what America wandered into is something that's elemental. And the elemental part of it is, if you go on the internet and you look up the genealogies of both the Persians, the Iranians, and the Arabs, just devote myself to my own little world.
Well, let me talk to you tomorrow if you have any time, and I should have some kind of reports for you, okay? And by the way, I have been producing some things, but I didn't send it to you because I thought that what we're doing is fulfilling enough. But I've made one of probably the best videos right now on the political Epstein files in existence right now. It's probably the best. It's under 4 minutes. And I analyzed the problem right now and contributed my own contribution. And here's my contribution. Number one, I'm not going to fight anybody who says that everything's useless, okay? Because they may be right, okay? In other words, there isn't a damn thing that I can do or anyone else can do to improve things. I don't feel like fighting those people. But I am, because I don't have much argument for them. They could be quite right. This could be just the biggest exercise in futility and humility that I've taken on in a long while. But I did my own review of the documents coming out of Epstein's files, and I saw other people making great headway in other areas. And so I chose my own area.
Right.
My own area is one particular file. There were so many things to learn about. The House Oversight Committee with James Comer managed to get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of documents released on his own. But that was also part of it, that was a different effort than Thomas Massey brought a Transparency Act, which became a public law. And it was very interesting how he managed to do that in the Congress, because everybody, including myself, laughed at him and said, there's no way you're going to be able to force the DOJ to release documents. People laughed at him, but he managed to do it, and he partnered with a guy named Ro Khanna in California.
Yeah, in California.
Yeah, and he managed to do it. And he's from MIT, Massey, and so a little bit smarter than maybe some of the others who are mostly attorneys in Congress. And they get this thing passed last November, and the law stipulates, Bondi has to release everything by December 19th, I believe it was, and then she doesn't do anything near that. And so anyway, actually, as I'm speaking, I feel I'm wasting our time, and I don't want to waste our time. But if there's one document that is being ignored right now that really should not be ignored, the House Oversight Committee sent a subpoena to Epstein's estate, and over the last, actually this week, the two of the accountants from the estate, have been in hearings in Washington, D.C., answering questions. It turns out the primary financer of Jeffrey Epstein was not only Leslie Wexner, but also the Rothschild family themselves, or the family, the Rothschilds. That's what's come out from the accountants. And I think they list 3 or 4 others as well, were the primary people who gave Epstein money to do what he was doing. So
let me stop you.
Yeah.
That's the financial backing of Mossad.
Yeah. And but one document that the House Oversight got last September was a big book, and nobody had even heard of this book. But Ghislaine Maxwell had made a book to give Jeff Epstein on his 50th birthday. And this book had little memos allegedly from Clinton, from Trump, from even a person who worked for Addy, a guy named Bran Farron. And
I remember the name.
Yeah, Bran Farron designed the theater in the basement on Further Lane. He's the one who designed the Halon firefighting system, the gas that would come out if there were ever a fire, and there were big tanks down in the basement. Bran Farron is the guy who put the little wires under the floor of the big barn in case somebody, a robber, managed to get in and was walking around in the house. And Bran Farron contributed a page to this book for Jeff Epstein's 50th birthday. And Maxwell is the one who put it all together. Well, there's a guy named Joel Pashkow, a Florida real estate guy, and there is a photo that he contributed of himself and Jeff Epstein and another man who hasn't been identified, and a woman who the DOJ has put a black box over her head, and they're standing at Mar-a-Lago on a sunny day holding a giant check, the kind you see on, like, sweepstakes or publisher clearinghouse or a lottery. You've won the lottery, and they have these giant prop checks. And that photo, and under the photo, he wrote a handwritten note, which basically amounts to a confession. And Joel Pashkow wrote, Jeffrey shows early skills with a woman and money and sells a fully depreciated woman to Donald Trump.
Make the definitive thing that, he can't claim ownership of any of his property because he's got to come up with his $500 million, cash fine, which he can't.
Mm-hmm.
So this just goes on and on and on.
Right.
And I think that, at the same time, little people such as ourselves, just, I think really the only thing we can do is look at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is happening right now in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the main event. I mean, it really is. Mm-hmm. All of these other little problems that Donald Trump has are minuscule by comparison.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is the clash of civilizations.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you told me that. I think I've sort of. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to release the video with Dr. Scheuer today, and
well, I didn't mean to rain on your parade.
No, you haven't. And then I'm putting together a separate channel just for our talks on YouTube, so it's not there with a whole bunch of other videos. It'll be a dedicated photographic history channel. And yeah, that's simply titling and labeling, so it'll have its own unique group, so that somebody might want to listen to one after another and not get a video on gardening or get a video on, rent control laws in New York City. So it'll be kind of in a category, in a group, so they can continue hearing other similar material that we've created.
Great. Good, good.
Yeah, and that's so that and what else? Yes, and then the only other thing I feel like now that I've been sharpening my mind. I hope, I don't know. Maybe I'm out to lunch, but I think I've been sharpening my mind, and I'm going to try and go in and help Addie with however I can, and. And at the simultaneously, I'm doing the G care, the go clear care types of things. So it's sort of all these main types of things. So I remember, sometimes you listen to these so-called cool executives and big tech people out in Silicon Valley, and they'll say, Elon's really good at eliminating the noise and just getting the signal. And if you just make one decision a day or 3 good decisions, you don't have to work 8 hours a day. You don't have to work 9 hours a day. You simply have to make 1 or 2 primary decisions that are excellent. And I've been living with that for about 20 years, that concept, of just make the important things, the priorities. And this morning I woke up and I went, no, you've got to get 20 fucking things done every day, at least 20 fucking things done.
That's true. I mean, if you're trying to do deals, if you're a deal guy, all you need, is one 365-day period, a great idea. That's what he's saying. Well, now you got to execute, and maybe it'll take you 25 years to do that.
Right. Yeah, the execution part. Well, I'll be around tomorrow.
Good. Well, look, I'll give you a ring at around 9-ish. Okay.
Good. Okay.
And then I've got to fill up because we're packing up and trying to get out of here for a month. So anyway.
Okay.
So it will be somewhat briefer than today.
All right, and I'll give you a report on what chapter I'm in, what book I finished reading, and I've got them right by my favorite chair. I just have all these other silly paperworks and things pulling me left, right, and center. I'm trying to just clear them out so that my mind is able to read. But I'm not going to wait and wait and wait and wait. I know you got to sort of just get in the water, start swimming.
Good. Swim away, lad.
Okay.
Okay. You take care.
You too. Thanks now, Clark. Talk to you soon.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.